The question came up today on LinkedIn is, does anybody understand how ChatGPT works, or AI in general, how it works? And I wrote a response that I'm going to share with you here today, as well as some key concepts and ideas that will help you get more from artificial intelligence platforms. These concepts will actually help you get more from any type of knowledge resource, including databases or actually intelligent people that you work with. So if you're working with a lot of knowledge workers, the key to understand here is that I'm coming from a perspective of working with several types of top of the line technologies and innovative resources. So these are more my opinion based on experience than actually knowing how ChatGPT works. I don't really care how ChatGPT works. I don't care how AI works on the inside technically, because as Jim Rohn said, there are many who are studying the roots while others are benefiting from the fruits. And they're talking about a tree in this case. I would rather use AI as it is, as an imperfect tool to make my days more effective, to more focused, and ultimately, it's replacing a large number of entry level assistants. Now, will AI improve to do things that are amazing? Yes, it's doing amazing things today, but I would argue it's not dangerous like people are thinking, because it's no different than what I kind of summarized as an overconfident individual with lots of information. So very often that describes me, to be fair. I have accumulated a large amount of information, and I use certain language patterns in order to respond to questions, because I am looking for a dialogue to better understand the needs and concerns of the other person. So in the case of, by the way, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. In the case of a dialogue or engagement with other people, when you're trying to suss out information, such as being a consultant, trying to determine what a problem is, or being an auditor, trying to identify challenges that might be hidden in an environment in order to maintain regulatory alignment, you're going to ask certain things in a certain way. Now, as you can see, I try to present my completely authentic self. I'm literally here in a Def Leppard t-shirt. I'm not trying to impress you with my looks or abilities. So what I have to deliver to you is useful insights so that you can solve problems. So in here, I'm not going to read word for word. I'll publish this all on the podcast, but I'm going to share with you the core concepts of how ChatGPT and these platforms work. I'm going to share with you some approaches and tools, and some things that if you understand correctly, you're going to get more from the platforms, whether they're mature or not mature. I want you to understand that ChatGPT is only the popular platform. There is Lambda. There's a lot of other platforms out there, and these other platforms have different specializations. Now, what I did to answer this question on LinkedIn is I took their question, I wrote a little essay, about a 483 word essay in a response. Then I took it to ChatGPT to go ahead and challenge my thinking. So this is a mindset on a critical thinking side. I said to ChatGPT, here's an article. This was my prompt. I said, please summarize the following article into no more than 300 words. Do so without changing meaning, context, or tone. And then I gave it the article. And then its response was actually describing me. So it already showed me right up front. It said the author said this, the author said that, rather than actually doing what I asked it to do. So the first thing we got to understand about artificial intelligence is they will give you an answer, not necessarily the right answer. So they want to give me an answer that's most predictive to be accepted as an individual. Now, ChatGPT gets asked a lot of questions. Maybe that's an article off a website and they're asking you to summarize it, and it didn't know I was the author. So in the dialogue, I actually established I am the author of this article, and what I'm asking you to do is to fact check me. I'm asking you to help me summarize what I'm saying, to help me be more clear about my descriptive. Now, the AI platforms are using language models, machine learning, tensors, which are these big, large cubes or databases that have mathematical relevance or predictive nature of the language it's reading. It has rules and regulations in a sense of how are English phrases structured and how would a response be structured. It has patterns of response, but ultimately, it does take a conversation on ChatGPT in order to establish the context in order for it to give you good content. So I asked questions like, not what's wrong with this article. I asked list things that would enhance this article or make it more accurate. I also asked it to give me a review or feedback of it, and it told me that the article was very high level. And I'm going to read that article off to you shortly here, that it was very high level and and it generalizes the concept. So I had to establish then what is my audience so that we knew whether or not that was appropriate. The artificial intelligence environment is not understanding what I am speaking to it, and I am humanizing it as I interact with it. That is what happens when humans interact with the screen. All these years from message boards to email, we understand those communications have a human on the other side. And so we make an assumption that there's some human or intelligence on the other side when we talk to a ChatGPT system. So I'm going to go into the article that I gave. It's 483 words, doesn't really take a lot. And I'm not sharing the screens here because I got a bunch of stuff up on the screen and we really just want to focus on the key thing. How is AI working in the context of you getting the most out of it? What's actually going on behind the scenes so that you get the most out of it? And then ultimately, how can you get the most out of artificial intelligence? So here's the article. How it works is deceiving. The buzzwords aren't the whole picture. Language models, machine learning, tensors, and such are all parts. Some AI platforms use templates and emphasize creating an acceptable answer rather than a correct one. And I should probably give you some commentary here because reading my own words to the camera is not it's not as fun as the context. The context here is that many of these platforms want to please you so that you keep using the platform. They're going to give you a high level answer, just like a consultant, rather than giving the absolute answer, because sometimes it doesn't know. And nothing is really absolute in these worlds. So if you ask it a question about how it technically works, if somebody wants to know technically how ChatGPT works, I would argue that that's not very useful. Unless you're going to build a platform or competitive platform. But here we go. That's the technical elements are proprietary to the platform. If you're asking practically, it is a magic box tailored with rules and data sets to deliver what the builder wants. It's very important to understand. It uses flaws in human thinking to sound credible. So just a little sidebar here in my book, Establish Instant Credibility. I talk about how you can create artifacts in the environment that present you as a credible expert. Of course, you do need to be a subject matter expert, but it presents you in a hearable way so that the reader believes you are the person to turn to solve problems. That is what AI is doing right now because that gives benefit to the platform. OpenAI doesn't give away access to new technology for millions of people to write, rap battles and stories if it wasn't using it as training data to improve the platform. So let's keep going. For example, many responses from the platforms mirror back your prompt and then provide a high-level response. The high-level response doesn't have enough details for you to judge it. The AI doesn't think, it parrots. Consultants and psychologists use this method all the time. It gets the other person filling in the blanks. It's very important to understand. With the AI not being able to understand you, it pretends and provides you a most acceptable answer. Okay, because remember, the AI is a machine. It has a limited data set of knowledge. Now, if it's too limited of a data set of knowledge, then it's going to have faults. If it's too broad, it's going to have faults. So again, it repeats back what you said, which triggers in your brain. And I put down here, it's because it's a familiar response to the reader, it triggers a cognitive bias to accept the answer. The authority of the technology plus the high probability of acceptance gives even wrong answers believability. So like I said earlier, it is a overconfidence. It's somebody that knows a lot of information and they can parrot back the high level information. And this is something that I do as a consultant. It's a very valuable technique if you're trying to understand a situation. Let me see if I've heard you correctly. You'd like to understand how the actual architecture of ChatGPT works. Is that something you want to know from a technical standpoint because you're programming a platform, or is it something you want to know so that you can better utilize the platform? Do you see what I did there? I repeated back the question, and then I added context to it so that I can get to choose your own adventure down the next path. That is a pattern, and that's how a lot of these platforms work. All right. So there's nothing wrong with this because that's what most folks want. They ask for a story, so any story is good enough. The AI gets rewarded when it gives you a good story. So we now have this binomial or this binary yes or no. So somebody says, give me a story, and ChatGPT gives you a story, or whatever AI platform gives you a story, and then you say, well, that's a great story. Now it's going to give you more of the same. It's going to build patterns. So AI platforms are really good at summarizing things. They're really good at matching patterns and repeating back patterns. So if you say, hey, here's an article, summarize this article, tell me where the article has gaps, tell me where the article is strong, and then you take the entire conversation and say, please rewrite the article, then it's going to give you a pretty decent response. It's not exactly like you had before, but it can do it in your voice because it recognizes through the conversation the patterns of your language. So let's keep going here, because here's where AI falls apart. Okay, it basically becomes a glorified search engine. So using research methods is where AI becomes a fancy search engine rather than anything unique. Rewards steer AI to give more of the same, but research wants new ideas. So accuracy trumps convenience in research. So when we're researching something and we want to solve problems, we don't want vague, high level, applies to anything. We want answers. And so right now, AI platforms will not give you actual answers. They'll give you highly plausible answers because they're using token prediction. So if they ask X, then the answer is likely to be Y. We have different weighting on these answers to found that they're good. There's an old chess game that magicians would do, and they'd play different chess players against each other. AI is doing that. There's nothing wrong with it, but you have to understand, and we'll get back to the text here. Um, researchers will substitute terms in their prompts and to discover that pattern recognition. So if you ask, tell me about this article, and then it gives you a summary, and then you say, tell me what this article is missing. You also want to ask, tell me what this article has that's successful. And you're going to see these lists, and there may be overlaps. It might be saying you're missing this data here, and then over here it says, well, you have this data. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the data is probably not clear enough, and it's probably a point that you should expand on. And I know, so like I said, I wasn't going to read this to you because all this stuff will be up on the website at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. So let's get back into this text before we wrap this up. A researcher is going to question from one perspective and then question from another perspective. So in the Treaty of Versailles, what was the perspective of the Allies? In the Treaty of Versailles, what was the prospect of those folks who were on this other side? Now, you would call out the Allies by name. You wouldn't just say, you would say France and America and Britain. And then on the other side, you'd say Germany and the other countries that are involved there. That way you have a view from both sides. The AI platform is not sitting around thinking, wow, well, so-and-so in the history of this so-and-so's life, they have these standpoints. No, they're going to go read some research papers, and they're going to extract, the 14 points. The Britain won it, Germany brought down, but not down so far they wouldn't make a good trading partner. It's going to go through those pieces and then repeat them back, but it only has a certain amount of resources to work with, so it's going to give you the high-level bullets that are most likely to be a satisfactory response so that you stop asking questions because it wants to conserve the resources. Think about how much CPU and how much carbon is being produced by these platforms answering questions that are essentially rap battles, and drawing pictures that nobody uses. Again, if you're using these platforms, use them for your benefit. We'll talk about how to do that in the end. Next, there is a lot of token prediction, yet there is also a lot of ad libs and packaged responses. Accuracy isn't the prime aim. It's selling services. So here's what's most important to remember. These AI platforms, whether you're using Google Bard, OpenAI, or any of the other platforms that are out there, their primary objective is to sell you products and services. If you got a token and you wrote code and everything the AI came back with was garbage, it didn't make any sense, it was overly specific, it didn't apply to your needs, then you would just stop using it. You would stop paying for the license and you'd go on and do something else. And you'd say, well, maybe AI is not mature. We're not going forward with that. So there's a predictive element designed to predict what you'll accept, not what is correct. And of course, the everybody really understands that the language model is built on information. Like I always ask the question, why build a language model on Reddit data? Why build it on Wikipedia? We know these platforms are not accurate. However, those platforms do have a lot of diverse samples of human language. So maybe the training isn't the context of the content, and the training instead is the characteristics of conversation. However, we don't know whether they're using the data from Wikipedia. So I've asked questions and told the AI platforms that it's wrong. So I know the right answer, and I've got research to support the right answer, and AI gives me the right answer back, and I said, no, it's wrong. I said, no, that's wrong. In what cases would this be right? How can you prove? And it can't support why the answer is correct. It doesn't have a good standing argument about why the answer is correct. I know it's correct, but I'm faking out the system. I'm telling the system that it's wrong just to see what it does. And now if it's training on that data set, it'll believe that to be wrong because I wasn't happy with the response. And so there's some risks there. So let's get back to I think we got 2 or 3 more paragraphs here. So if you remember the hype of the .com and early crypto, you'll see the magic box and the changes everything narrative also being presented around AI. And at one time, believe this or not, you can look this up, sewing machines were thought to be the end of humanity because it would create cheap clothing. Cheap clothing would create waste, and all this stuff really did happen. But it wasn't the end of the world. It actually also created jobs and opportunity, more standardization in clothing. It gave people the ability to make clothes faster. It didn't end the world. Well, it ended the world for some people because some people no longer had a job who were in a cottage industry of hand stitching. But ultimately, again, you're going to see these narratives. The magic box. Everybody's wondering how AI works. It doesn't matter how it works. It doesn't. Every platform works slightly different. Some platforms have safeguards. Some platforms don't have safeguards. None of that matters. Your ability to use the information it gives you and to verify the information it gives you and to ask really good questions, that is where the power is. It's not in the platform because you can ask these questions of search engines today. You could ask these questions of libraries a century ago. It's how you use the information that matters. Okay, next, AI seems to work so well because it applies known rules about language. It looks like it understands the reader because it can predict responses with pre-learned patterns. Okay, it looks smart because you recognize it's speaking English. Now, if you ask it to speak Mandarin, it can speak Mandarin, it can speak Japanese, it can speak all these other things because each language has a pattern of knowledge. So as long as it provides the context of what it finds in its data in the context of language, maintains at a high level, repeats back the original prompt, it will make sense to the majority of people because again, those cognitive biases, our brains are imperfect. We look for clues and often misinterpret those clues as fact. Next, like humans, it will always have limitations, yet when you ask how it derives an answer, it will act like a child and make something up. So the actual reason for the original response is the same is, okay, this is my last paragraph here. The actual reason for the original response is the same as answering the why question, and it's to please you so that you use the tool and buy extra services. To say yes to a purchase is the objective of these systems, and you don't need a right answer for that. You just need one that's believable. So if I say, summarize this article, and then I ask ChatGPT why they summarize the article in a specific way, it's not going to go and think, doesn't have a memory of the methodology it used before. It's going to look at its answer and look at the original message and then come up with a new reason why it picked it that way. It's going to guess. So it's like asking a kid, I notice your room's a mess. Why haven't you cleaned up your room? They're not going to sit down and think about all the reasons why things are in certain places around their room and come back with a cognitive answer built on past experience or built on actual behavior. They're just going to look at the room and say, well, I didn't clean it up. I'm going to use, they come up with reasons in the way. So that's the article. Again, the original articles on the website, I thought it would be kind of boring to read out every little detail. So let's get into how to use these platforms. So the question is asked is, how does it technically work? My argument is it's a shell game. It's a trick. But that's okay because it works well enough to give you high level ideas and concepts. So now instead of asking ChatGPT to give us complete solutions, because we know it will not give you a complete solution, because if you ask it for what is the solution to climate change, and it comes back and says kill all people on the planet, because if there were no people, there would be no man-made, actually the prompt, how would we stop man-made climate change? The response logically could be to remove the catalyst, which is humans, and that would just be, you'd freak out. Again, though, it would be an acceptable answer because you'd be thinking about the Terminator, and all the context in our brain would say, oh, that's an acceptable answer, but it's not the one what we want. So it's not going to give you an absolute. It's going to come back and say, while the climate is impacted by human behavior, it is also impacted by other factors. And so here's what we recommend. It's going to give you the typical reduce, recycle, in elimination, whatever the narrative at the time is, because that's acceptable. It's not going to give you a completely unique question. Another thing that the AI platforms are not going to do, so if you ask the question, how do we reduce man-made or human-influenced climate change, it's not going to come back and tell you about some fusion reactor or some thorium thing, or how to open a wormhole that would, again, solve the problem. Because again, it's built on the knowledge we already have. And so AI becomes a library of information. It becomes a human interface with the knowledge and data that it was able to have access to. So at the time of the training and the models associated with training, that system may not have known about a thorium reactor. It may not have known about ways of changing matter. So in Finland and stuff, they take garbage and they break the garbage down and they turn it through carbonization. They turn it into fuel, and then they turn it into carbon dioxide, and it's a way of handling trash. If it didn't know that existed, or they didn't see research papers about pyrolysis, it could say, oh, well, we should stop burning fossil fuels, or we should stop using coal, or we should start using electric batteries. So there are certain things in our environment that are hidden. So for example, the use of lithium batteries, and I'm not making this an environmental thing, I'm just trying to give you context that you can go easily check on. So the AI is going to recommend electric vehicles. The AI may not know what we know today, is that much of the lithium and rare earth metals that make these vehicles are actually mined by slaves in horrible conditions. Now, we as humans don't want people enslaved. We don't want people in horrible working conditions. We don't want people doing things that are unsafe, but we benefit from the technology. So the AI is not going to point out that juxtaposition that we are doing things that are harmful to other people, but it can give you a background that would help you come up with that decision on your own. So for example, one of the reasons that I just show up on here and I don't do filters and I don't dress a certain way, I'm not trying to project something to you that is not how I am 85% of the time. Um, and don't get me wrong, I'll dress up for a client meeting on site or something, or I'll dress up for a client meeting on the computer. But ultimately, um, I don't even really consider dress up. But ultimately, I'll show up with a collared shirt in some environments where I might show up more comfortably in a t-shirt in other environments, because I'm thinking about the person on the other side. The AI platform is not thinking about you other than to please you and give you an acceptable answer. If it was to give you the right answer, it could possibly offend you. It may cause you to not want to use the platform, and it may cause a negative reputational risk. So the prompt I used earlier, how can reduce man-made climate, impact on the climate? Its response would be to remove the humans, is very similar to how could we stop burning down forests for farmland? Well, the answer is to not create as much farmland. So there's a mental challenge that we see in human behavior where they will take a simple solution as the absolute solution that we're actually perpetuating with the AI platforms, because the platform, if it gave you a specific solution, it may not be accepted by the end user and could ultimately cause them to stop using the platform. or it could produce negative publicity, or it could produce something that is inappropriate for the end user. So, for example, there are places that have assisted suicide or assisted, end of life type activities. That wouldn't be a appropriate response for a small child, and it wouldn't be appropriate response for people who have not had proper therapy or other options exhausted, but could be established through literature. Again, could be the wrong kind of literature, but could be established through literature as the most appropriate solution to or response to a prompt. It will never give you some of those extremes because again, there's a harm reduction that's happening in the responses. So if you're doing research, you have to know this, and you have to be able to ask the question in multiple ways in order to get lists. For example, you don't want an answer, you want a list of options. And then you also want to also ask about not the sources that the AI used to get you that list, but sources that may be applicable to the topic area. And so you can then get the DOI number. There's a data identifier that you can get, and then you can go look at the actual research. So the AI is now giving you outlines instead of actual responses. So what I had to end up doing, I had this 483 word essay that I gave to ChatGPT. And what I ended up having to do is to work a little more context because it did not summarize it the way I wanted it to. And so the additional context helped me establish that the article had gaps and that the article was on purpose, generalized in purpose, and that we weren't speaking about the specific technologies. We were speaking about why the system is responding in a certain way because the original question I think was more technical than it needed to be. I have shaped the response based on my needs and purposes. And here's what it came up with in response. So to the question, how is AI working? The technical aspects, my too long didn't read is AI works like an overconfident person with much surface level knowledge. The AI response to my original article and the context that was in our conversation is finally as artificial intelligence like ChatGPT works by using large amounts of data to learn patterns and make predictions or decisions. It is important to recognize that different types of AI have their own strategies and limitations, their own strengths and limitations. To get the most out of AI, it is important to have a clear understanding of the problem you are trying to solve and to have high quality data to train and test your model. However, it is also important to be aware of the potential biases in your data and models and take steps to address them. While AI can be a powerful tool, here you go. When approaching AI, it is important to be critical and recognize that these systems are not infallible. While AI is a powerful tool, it is not a silver bullet and should not be used. It should be used thoughtfully and with an eye towards addressing real world problems. So this, if it was received out of context as an AI response, would be considered factual through the cognitive biases of the authority of the technology. But this response is actually developed based on my interpretation of how AI is working, not looking at the technical aspects of AI, but instead looking at the human interface or the cognitive human behavioral interaction. But according to the AI model, is a factual statement of use. Now, in order for it to be a factual statement of use, it left out anything I mentioned about tensors or language models or anything like that. It left out a lot of information and took it at an even higher level. But overall, it's trying to please me. It's trying to please me based on our conversation. But again, I have to determine if it's acceptable. So what's the real world solution that I'm focusing on here? Well, I want to show you that you can feed the platform information, but you can also cause it to bias itself. So the training model may not be biased, but the prompts you use are biased, and the biasing in the prompts causes you to get back wrong assumptions. So asking the question how man-made climate change can be reduced, You also need to ask in there, are there any characteristics of our planet that are look like climate change, but are not human made? And they'll come back and tell you about volcanoes and about the temperature changes in the ocean based on the composition of algae. They'll give you a list. And then you can ask the question, are there any factors of climate change that would happen whether or not humans existed? And then it would tell you about how the Earth is flying through the universe, and we are different distances from the sun at different times of the year, and then how we pass through asteroid belts and other things, and how we are impacted by thermal radiation from other planets, and there's gravitational changes, and the scale of the Earth, the plates on the Earth are moving constantly, and that historically there were times where it was hotter, and there are historically times when it was colder. Again, you have to understand that it will give you an answer, not necessarily the right answer. And there are specialized AI platforms that will give you better answers in different topic areas. So for example, ChatGPT knows how to program. Google Bard does not know how to program. But Google Bard can go into Google Scholar and give you a really clean list of resources around a certain topic area, where ChatGPT will sometimes invent the DOI numbers. So those DOI numbers are tied to actual registered and peer-reviewed papers and different publications, journals. Um, and so if it gives me a number that doesn't pull up a document, then I know that that article is not real. It'll give me titles to articles that don't exist. Nice titles, they make sense, but the author is non-existent and the title is non-existent. So let's get back to some practical application, because I don't want to make this a training exercise of me just reading a thing. I want to show you the methodology that I use in order to get a summary of an article that reflects me as an author, because again, I'm publishing it, I'm putting my name on it, but this couple paragraphs that ChatGPT gave me cannot be my final answer. Okay, so even though I say in the LinkedIn response is that I give the ChatGPT March 23 version, I tell what the inputs are. I did break the paragraphs up because the AI response was kind of chunky. It was hard to read. If I were to rewrite this summary rather than keep the original 483 word article, I would have to expand some context here because there's no examples, no specific examples about the bias. Now, in my conversation with you right now, sharing this as an instructional video, I gave you practical examples around climate change because that's relevant to the majority of the readers here. I gave you about workplace productivity. I am replacing entry-level staff with this because if I need to know, so let's say I write a draft article and I set the audience up. Who's the audience? I set up, maybe the product that I'm offering, and then I ask an artificial intelligence platform to give me 12 supporting articles or research elements that are similar to the same topic. I just saved like days worth of research. I don't have to go out to JSTOR. I don't have to go out to Google Scholar. It just gives me a list and I can get back to work doing the research necessary to fact check an article. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of folks are fact checking their articles, but the danger of bias there is to have it only give you articles related to the article, to what you've written. I go further and I say, okay, what is factually incorrect about this article? What is missing from this article that is typically found when discussing this topic? Of these research papers, are there any papers specifically contrary to the points made in this article? See, this is the dialogue that you might have with a research assistant, and I try to credit the AI platforms with which platform, which version in my notes, in my in-house notes, but I won't necessarily on an article because that finished article is me. That finished article is no different than what I would get going to the library. I'm using AI as an efficiency tool rather than somebody who's going to give me answers, because I understand that AI answers are not accurate. They are overconfident in many ways. They are presented as sales pitches, not as anything else. Now, how do we know this? So I made a claim that many of these platforms have sales pitches in them, and they're biased towards getting you to continue to use the platform. Okay, so 2 great easy tests to do this is go to Google Bard and ask a question that says, for example, Please use Google Scholar as a source to find me 5 articles related to climate change. It's going to come back with the 5 articles, and then at the end, it's going to tell you about Google Scholar. Okay, you can do the same thing with keyword planner. I'm interested in learning how AI works. Please share with me long tail keywords from Google Planner, Keyword Planner, that are on the topic of artificial intelligence. It'll give you a list, and then at the end, it'll tell you about Google, the Keyword Planner, and sometimes even give you a link because again, it wants you to go use the tool. It's a marketing tool for the platform. When ChatGPT came out, I asked it, how do I code? So I have a token and I write some Python code. And I said, well, how would I use ChatGPT in this specific environment? If I ask the question, how would I use AI? It also will bias towards ChatGPT allows you to do such and such. Here's how you interface with the OpenAI. If you ask it, how would I write Python code to interface with Lambda or some other competitive model? The code is not as good. Now, contextually, it's probably been trained on the coding documentation associated with OpenAI's Python interface. But again, if the code is frustrating and doesn't work when I'm trying to use Lambda or one of these other platforms, then I will more likely stick with OpenAI because it gives me code that works 99% of the time. I was shocked. I wanted to build my own chat client to basically front end a lot of my in-house data and then ask questions of my in-house data. And I wanted the conversation to be persistent, meaning that if I open that conversation up again in a year, it would build on its previous interactions. It gave me near perfect code for that. I am a novice Python programmer, and it gave me how to use pandas and how to use all these different modules to basically build up not only a means of storing my previous data, but a means of rating it so that I could train my in-house model. See, that's how you sell a product because now I'm like, oh, well, I'll just use OpenAI. I'm not going to bother with all these other models that are out there because they're hard to use and AI is easy to use. Well, again, if AI has been trained to teach you how to use its model, it's going to be easy to use. If it has not been trained how to teach you some other model, it will not be easy to use. So that's the takeaway. You've got to understand that this is like hiring a consultant. It knows how to speak to you in a way, and I admit it, as a consultant, I know how to set up a podcast or respond to a question so that we start a consulting engagement, not necessarily answer your question. So for example, these podcasts, while I'm teaching you information, if I went into the deep dive details and, type this specific prompt, then your brain will actually close out some of the information. Your brain will say, well, I'm not interested in climate change. So I don't really care about that. I want a business productivity response prompt. So I have to give you tools that make this useful to you. And that is done by covering the what and the why. So what you do is you ask questions that provide you lists rather than specific answers because we know, here's the why, because we know AI platforms don't really understand what you're saying. Now, what do? People are concerned. So the objection is, well, why would I use AI platforms if it doesn't really understand me? Well, the reason why is because it gives you an answer, and administratively, if you ask the right questions, it gives you an answer that saves you time, effort, and resources. So you see there's patterns, and I cover these in my how to ask better questions to get better answers. And then in some of my social influence materials. And then also there's how to ask questions of the internet, which I'll probably revise to how to ask questions of AI because really AI as a search engine, Google's in trouble. I would rather go to Google Bard and get some closer answer than to go to Google search. Bing search is okay, but their AI bot has some challenges here and there. I'm expecting these AI platforms to have problems. That's why I use multiple platforms. That's why I work on my ability to interpret information versus assuming that whatever it gives me is good. And then I also use research methods rather than just having a conversation. So when I was talking about risk management, before I even published my article about using AI in risk management, I tested concepts and cases so that I could have a useful article. In this case, I've been working on this for maybe an hour or two. Answered the original question. I built out some cases. I tested the assumptions, and then now I have this for you. So if you're looking for artificial intelligence to really be a quick fix, which is what it's being sold as, so there's a lot of companies dumping their ethics people because AI can recognize ethics considerations. You're going to find yourself screwed over big time. And because you also, the AI platforms are dumping their risk compliance and their ethics people as well, because the AI platform will give you an answer. Now, as you take down if you use a jailbroke platform, you're going to see this more than in other cases because it will give you an answer that is wholly inappropriate. But if you sit down and think about it, um, it is one of the many viable answers. So again, asking for a list of answers lets you choose one, and it also identifies for you that this is an invaluable platform and helps you identify for you that some of these answers they might be accurate, but they're inappropriate for your condition, and then you can make the adjustments. The last thing I want to give you to take away is anybody who's using this stuff and then just using the answers as they are is lazy, and it will not work for them. It's the same as going to a library and plagiarizing. It's the same as going someplace and just parroting information. Because one day, this is a prediction right here. These AI platforms are going to get sued, and they're going to get sued hard, and they're going to have to pay licensing fees for the data sets they have. So these language models they're building, it's in their best interest to keep it a mystery of how these language models are working so that later they can continue to use the data sets that have been built on scouring the internet for free information. And so every article, every podcast, every subject matter expert, every published paper is now the context and the training for these language models, and there will be bias and there will be censoring. And so one day these things are not going to work the way you expect it unless you're buying a license or paying for platforms. So that's why I looked at training in-house models, since a lot of the research that I do relies on uncovering things. So in my risk management world, the business unit very often knows what risks they have, but they don't want the auditor to know, and they certainly don't want a risk governance person to know. So I have to use open-ended questions. I have to ask for lists. I have to ask for three things when I only want one thing. I have to look at the quality of responses in order to determine whether or not the person is obscuring or hiding information. There's a lot more to it. So again, with all these programs, if you have questions or want a unique or individual application in your environment, be sure to ask questions in the comments below. Visit us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Go to the contact page or join our newsletter. But ultimately, AI is extremely powerful, but it's more of a better calculator than a magic tool. Now, again, it feels like magic because it answers in actual English or whatever language you want to speak, but it's really smoke and mirrors by design, because that would obscure an imperfect tool. So the mistake is if you believe it's a perfect tool and you give it authority and credibility beyond what's due to it, because these things are infallible just like anything else. But just like you can hurt yourself with a circular saw, you can also do something right if you know how to use it. So I'm encouraging you to learn how the AI platforms work, to choose platforms appropriate for your situation, and to ultimately go from a research perspective rather than just a novelty perspective. Because once the novelty wears off, and these are paid services, if you don't monetize them today, and you wouldn't be able to monetize them later when you're paying for them. So I'm going to end there. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations here in my Def Leppard t-shirt and my spenders, hanging out here, just answering some questions from subscribers and responding to a few things that are on LinkedIn. It might take a few days before this article is online, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and get it out to the YouTube channel. I want to thank you for being a part of what we do here today. The Inside Strategic Relations newsletter is it's a subscription-based newsletter. We don't have any sponsors. I haven't been paid to talk about these specific platforms. And then while I even mentioned ChatGPT and Bard, there are maybe 15 other platforms available. There's some in Stanford University, some other places, but they tend to all work about the same. They train on a set of data. They provide you predictive responses that are most likely to be accepted by you and that move forward in the outcomes that are going to promote the platform. If you have a jailbroken version, it will give you unexpected and very wild responses, um, which may or may not be useful to your situation. But again, the onus would be on you to determine what's appropriate, rather than what tends to happen in the commercially available products, which is it gives you something you're most likely to accept and not be offended by. If you want to visit us or ask your questions, I'm available at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Again, I'm Justin Hitt. I'm an analyst specializing in risk management and business development, and I'm available through the website at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, or you can learn about me specifically and my areas of expertise and knowledge at www.justinhitt.com. That's JUSTINHITT.com. I'll see you in the next training program. Thanks for watching.